Everyone knew the single most important rule of the Grand Alpha Summit. Never look King Drogo in the eye. He was the Iron Wolf, a monster in a three-piece suit who ended wars with a single snarl and ruled the northern territories with a fist of steel. Anna was nobody, just an invisible Omega servant trying to survive the night without being noticed. But when she found the terrifying king asleep in the VIP lounge, she made a fatal mistake. She let her guard down. She whispered a secret thought to the empty air, believing she was safe. She wasn't. The lock clicked. The beast woke up. And now, the most dangerous predator in the world isn't letting her leave until she repeats what she just said. Welcome to the cage. Chapter 1. The Sleeping Devil. The Grand Alpha Summit was a cacophony of clinking crystal, boastful roars, and the heavy, cloying scent of too much power confined in one ballroom. For Anna, however, it was just another night of trying to disappear into the wallpaper. As an Omega servant, her survival depended on two things: silence and invisibility. Her feet ached in her worn shoes as she balanced a tray of empty champagne flutes, navigating the sea of tuxedo-clad predators who wouldn't hesitate to snap her neck if she spilled a drop on their polished shoes. She needed a moment of peace, a fleeting second to breathe before the head housekeeper barked another order at her. She slipped toward the heavy mahogany doors of the VIP lounge, a restricted area reserved for the highest-ranking alphas. It was supposed to be empty at this hour, the dignitaries busy posturing on the main floor. Anna pushed the door open just enough to slide her slender frame inside, sighing as the muffled roar of the party faded into the background. The room smelled of aged leather, cigar smoke, and something darker, like a forest just before a storm. She moved to collect the discarded tumblers on the low table, keeping her eyes cast down, until a heavy, rhythmic sound made her freeze. Someone was sleeping on the Chesterfield sofa in the corner. Anna's heart hammered against her ribs as she squinted through the dim light. It wasn't just anyone. It was him. King Drogo, the Iron Wolf. The man whose reputation was whispered in terrified tones across every packland. He was massive, even in sleep, his broad shoulders stretching the fabric of his dark suit. One large hand rested on his stomach, while the other hung loosely off the edge of the sofa, his fingers scarred from countless battles. He looked peaceful, which was a terrifying contrast to the violence everyone knew he was capable of unleashing. She should have left immediately. That was the smart thing to do. But Anna found herself rooted to the spot, captivated by the rare sight of the monster at rest. Without the terrifying intensity of his golden glare, his features were strikingly sharp, almost noble. His dark hair fell over his forehead, softening the brutal edge of his jawline. For a moment, he didn't look like the tyrant who crushed rebellions. He looked like a man. A dangerously beautiful man. Anna took a step closer, her curiosity overriding her survival instinct. The air around him crackled with latent power, making the fine hairs on her arms stand up. She felt a strange pull, a warmth in her chest she couldn't explain. In the safety of the silence, thinking he was deep in a dreamless slumber, she let the thought on the tip of her tongue slip out into the quiet room. Her voice was barely a breath, soft and trembling. It's a shame the devil is so handsome. The silence that followed was heavy, instantaneous, and suffocating. Anna turned to leave, her heart racing at her own boldness, but a sound stopped her cold. It was the sharp intake of breath. She froze, her eyes widening as she looked back at the sofa. King Drogo was no longer sleeping. His eyes were wide open, glowing with a predatory molten gold light that pierced through the shadows and pinned her to the rug. There was no grogginess in his gaze, only a terrifying, razor-sharp focus. He rose from the sofa with a fluid, supernatural grace that defied his massive size, unfolding his height until he towered over the room. Anna couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. She watched in paralyzed horror as he didn't lunge for her, but instead walked calmly, deliberately, past her. He moved to the mahogany door she had just entered through. With a click that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room, he turned the brass lock, sealing them inside. Then he turned slowly to face her, a low rumble starting deep in his chest. Chapter 2. The King's Roar. The click of the lock reverberated through the room, sounding final and absolute. Anna pressed her back against the nearest wall, her pulse hammering in her throat like a trapped bird. King Drogo did not rush. He did not need to. He moved with the terrifying, languid confidence of a predator that had already cornered its prey and was simply savoring the fear before the strike. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with static electricity that made Anna's skin prickle. She opened her mouth to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, to explain that she was just a foolish servant who spoke out of turn. But the words died in her throat as he stepped into her personal space. He was massive, a wall of muscle and heat that blocked out the dim light of the lounge, effectively erasing the rest of the world. Drogo leaned down, his face inches from hers. Up close, he was even more devastatingly handsome, but it was a terrifying beauty, sharp as cut glass. He didn't speak. Instead, he inhaled deeply. The sound was ragged and primal, his nostrils flaring as he took in the scent of her fear mixed with the natural fragrance of her skin. To Anna, she smelled like dish soap and cheap detergent, but to the Alpha King, she smelled like something else entirely. She saw his pupils dilute, swallowing the gold of his irises until his eyes were nearly black pools of obsession. His hand slammed against the wall beside her head, trapping her completely, the vibration traveling through her spine. "Say it again," he commanded, his voice a low gravel that vibrated in her chest. It wasn't a request, it was an order given by a man who had never been denied anything in his life. Anna trembled, shaking her head slightly, too terrified to speak. She thought he was mocking her, preparing to punish her for her insolence. But then his other hand came up, not to strike, but to graze the sensitive skin of her neck. The touch was electric. A jolt of pure heat shot through her, and she gasped. That small sound seemed to snap the last thread of Drogo's control. The beast inside him, the ancient wolf that had been cold and dormant for decades, roared to life with a violence that demanded release. He didn't just realize she was his mate, he felt it in every fiber of his being. The connection was instant, overwhelming, and absolute. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling sharply, and then he pulled back and let out a roar that shattered the crystal vase on the side table. "Mine!" The word wasn't spoken, it was torn from his throat, a declaration of ownership that shook the very foundations of the room. It was loud enough to be heard outside, loud enough to stop the music in the ballroom beyond. Almost immediately, the heavy handle of the door jiggled violently. Fists pounded against the mahogany. "Your Majesty! King Drogo! Is everything all right?" The security team was trying to breach the room, sensing the explosion of alpha power. Drogo didn't move away from her. He kept his body pressed against hers, shielding her from the door, his eyes locked on her face. He turned his head slightly toward the door and let out a low, warning growl that vibrated through the wood, a sound so lethal that the pounding stopped instantly. No one dared enter a room where the Iron Wolf was claiming his territory. He looked back at Anna, his expression fierce and unyielding. "You are not a servant anymore," he growled, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "You are mine." Chapter 3. The Walk of Shame and Pride. The silence on the other side of the door was deafening. Anna knew that beyond the heavy wood, dozens of the most powerful shifters in the world were waiting, listening, and judging. She looked down at her uniform, a simple fraying black dress with a white apron that marked her as the lowest of the low. She was a nobody, an omega with no pack standing, trapped in the arms of a king. Panic flared in her chest. If she walked out there like this, they would tear her apart with their eyes. She tried to pull away, her hands pushing futilely against his rock-hard chest. "I can't go out there," she whispered, her voice cracking. Please, Your Majesty. Look at me. I'm nothing. They will laugh at you. Drogo looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time seeing the shame etched into her features. His expression darkened, not with anger at her, but with fury at a world that had made her feel so small. He reached up and unbuttoned his suit jacket, shrugging the heavy, expensive fabric off his broad shoulders. Without a word, he draped it over her. The jacket was enormous on her small frame, the silk lining warm from his body heat, and it swallowed her completely, falling to her mid-thighs and hiding the servant's uniform from view. It smelled of expensive cologne, cedar wood, and the potent, earthy scent of alpha. Let them laugh, Drogo said, his voice deadly calm as he buttoned the jacket under her chin, his large fingers surprisingly dexterous. And I will tear their throats out. He didn't wait for her permission. He wrapped a possessive arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his side, and unlocked the door. He kicked it open, revealing the corridor and the entrance to the grand ballroom. The transition was jarring. The bright lights of the chandeliers assaulted Anna's eyes, and the sudden hush that fell over the crowd was suffocating. Every head turned. Every conversation died. They walked into the ballroom, the Alpha King and the servant girl hidden beneath his coat. The contrast was stark and shocking. Drogo walked with his head high, his gaze daring anyone to speak, his presence dominating the enormous space. Anna kept her eyes on the floor, focusing on the movement of his polished shoes, trying to breathe through the waves of hostility rolling off the crowd. She could feel their stares like physical blows, confusion, disgust, envy. She was an anomaly, a glitch in their perfect elitist world. But Drogo did not rush. He paraded her through the center of the room, cutting a path through the dignitaries like a shark moving through water. When a high-ranking alpha from the southern pack stepped forward, perhaps to ask a question or offer a greeting, Drogo let out a low, rumbling snarl that stopped the man in his tracks. The message was clear. Do not approach. Do not look. Do not breathe in her direction. Anna felt the vibration of his growl through his chest, a terrifying sound that was somehow comforting because it was directed at the world, not her. He was a monster. Yes, but for the first time in her life, the monster was on her side. They reached the grand exit, and the cool night air hit her face, but the heat of his arm around her waist never wavered. Chapter 4. The Unworthy Mate. The limousine was a sleek, armored fortress that glided through the city streets, insulating them from the chaos they had left behind at the summit. Inside, the silence was thick and heavy, filled only by the hum of the engine and the sound of Anna's ragged breathing. She sat as far away from Drogo as the leather seat would allow, clutching the lapels of his jacket tightly around her neck. The reality of what had just happened was crashing down on her. She wasn't Cinderella. She was an Omega servant who had just been claimed by the most ruthless warlord in the shifter world. It was a mistake. It had to be a mistake. You have to let me go, Anna said, breaking the silence. Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to look at him. Drogo was watching her from the shadows of the car, his golden eyes unblinking. You don't know who I am. I have no bloodline. My parents were rogues. I have no wolf spirit to speak of. I can't even shift properly. I am the lowest rank there is. She spilled the secrets she usually guarded with her life, desperate to make him see reason before it was too late. You are a king. You need a Luna who is strong, someone with power. If you take me, you will be weak. They will use me against you. Drogo moved before she could blink. One moment he was on the other side of the car, and the next he was looming over her, crowding her into the corner of the seat. He didn't touch her, but his presence was overwhelming. Weak? He repeated, the word rolling off his tongue with disdain. You think I am so fragile that a mate of lower status will crumble my kingdom? You insult me, little one. He reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering on her cheek. I do not need a political alliance. I have armies for that. I do not need a warrior. I have killers for that. I need you. Anna stared at him, stunned by the intensity of his conviction. She opened her mouth to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but he pressed a finger to her lips, silencing her. No more, he ordered softly. You doubt yourself because you have been told you are nothing. I will spend the rest of my life showing you that they were wrong. He pulled back and pressed a button on the intercom system built into the armrest. Ronan, he barked into the speaker, addressing his beta who was driving the lead vehicle. Prepare the jet. We leave for the Iron Kingdom tonight. Notify the palace that I am returning with my mate. The finality in his voice terrified her. The Iron Kingdom was a frozen, brutal territory in the north, thousands of miles away from everything she had ever known. She was being kidnapped, in a sense, swept away by a tidal wave she couldn't control. But as she looked at Drogo, who had settled back into his seat but kept one hand resting protectively on her knee, she realized that part of her, the deep instinctual part buried under years of fear, didn't want to run. She was terrified of the future, yes, but for the first time she wasn't invisible. The car slowed as they approached the private airfield, the bright lights of the runway illuminating the grim determination on Drogo's face. He was taking her home, and nothing on earth was going to stop him. Chapter 5. The Snake in the Grass. The tarmac was windswept and cold, the private jet waiting like a sleeping steel bird under the glare of the floodlights. Anna shivered, not just from the chill wind that whipped around her bare legs, but from the sheer scale of Drogo's wealth and power. A phalanx of guards stood at attention, creating a corridor toward the stairs. Drogo guided her out of the car, his hand firm on the small of her back. She kept her head down, clutching his jacket, hoping to board quickly and hide from the prying eyes of the pilot and crew. But before they could reach the stairs, a sharp, melodic voice cut through the noise of the wind. Cassius, surely this is a joke. Drogo stiffened beside her, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Anna looked up to see a woman stepping out from the shadows near the hangar. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with cascading silver blonde hair, porcelain skin, and a red dress that cost more than Anna would earn in 10 lifetimes. It was Lady Seraphina, the daughter of the Southern Alpha, a woman who had been publicly campaigning to be Drogo's mate for years. She looked at Anna with a mixture of amusement and utter revulsion, her blue eyes scanning the oversized jacket and the cheap scuffed shoes peeking out from underneath. You can't be serious, Seraphina laughed, though the sound was brittle and sharp as broken glass. She walked closer, ignoring the guards who looked uncomfortable. You're dragging a servant onto the royal jet? What is she, a pet? A bed warmer for the flight? Really, Drogo, I know you have appetites, but this is beneath even you. She smells like floor cleaner and desperation. She wrinkled her perfect nose, making a show of waving her hand in front of her face. Send the little rat back to the kitchens where she belongs, so we can discuss the treaty properly. Anna shrank back, the insults stinging because they echoed her own insecurities. She tried to pull away from Drogo, to step aside and let the real people talk. But Drogo's grip on her waist tightened to the point of pain. He didn't look at Seraphina. He looked at the space above her head, dismissing her existence entirely. Ronan, he said calmly to his beta, though the underlying threat in his tone was unmistakable. Remove this obstacle from my path. Seraphina gasped, her face flushing red with indignation. You can't dismiss me. I am a High Alpha's daughter. You are choosing trash over me? Drogo stopped moving. He slowly turned his head to look Seraphina in the eye. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Careful, he whispered, his voice carrying effortlessly over the wind. You are speaking to your future queen. The only reason you are still breathing is because I do not wish to upset her with the sight of blood on our first night. He stepped closer, towering over the terrified woman. She is not trash. She is the Luna of the Iron Kingdom. And if you ever disrespect her again, I will forget about treaties and I will wipe your father's pack off the map." He didn't wait for a response. He swept Anna up into his arms, carrying her bridal style past the stunned Serafina, who stood frozen on the tarmac, pale and trembling. Anna buried her face in his neck, overwhelmed by his defense of her. He carried her up the stairs of the jet, leaving the old world and his enemies behind. As the cabin door hissed shut, sealing them in, Anna realized there was no going back. The war had begun, and she was right in the center of it. Chapter 6. Flight to the Iron Kingdom. The cabin of the private jet was a masterclass in silent luxury, a sleek tube of cream leather and polished walnut that hurtled through the night sky at 30,000 feet. For Anna, however, it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a high-altitude interrogation room. She sat rigid in the plush captain's chair, her hands still clutching the lapels of King Drogo's massive suit jacket, as if it were a life raft in a stormy ocean. Across the narrow aisle, Drogo watched her. He hadn't looked away since takeoff. He had discarded his tie and unbuttoned the collar of his dress shirt, revealing the thick column of his throat and the faint edge of a tribal tattoo that disappeared beneath the fabric. He held a glass of amber whiskey in one large hand, swirling the liquid hypnotically, but he didn't drink. He just watched her, his golden eyes tracing every breath she took. The silence stretched until it was almost painful. Anna felt like an intruder in this world of wealth and power. She was an Omega who had spent her life scrubbing floors and eating leftovers. Now she was sitting in a flying palace with a predator who claimed to own her. Her stomach gave a treacherous, loud rumble that shattered the quiet. She flushed crimson, mortified, and pressed a hand against her midsection. Drogo's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile softening his harsh features. He didn't mock her. Instead, he reached out and pressed the call button. A flight attendant appeared instantly from the galley, her eyes darting nervously toward the king before settling on the floor. She was terrified of him, Anna realized. Everyone was. "Food," Drogo commanded simply. "Meat, rare, and bring everything else you have." Minutes later, a feast was laid out on the small table between them. There were platters of fruits, cheeses, warm bread, and a massive steak that was seared on the outside and bloody in the middle. The smell was intoxicating. Anna's wolf, usually so dormant and quiet she barely felt it, stirred within her, whining at the scent of the protein. She reached for a fork, her hand trembling slightly, but Drogo moved faster. He took the plate of steak, cut a large, succulent piece, and held it out to her. He wasn't going to let her feed herself. It was a primal, possessive display, the alpha providing for his mate, ensuring she accepted his sustenance. Anna hesitated, her heart pounding. To accept food from an alpha's hand was an act of submission, a deep acknowledgement of the bond. If she ate this, there was no going back. She looked into his eyes and saw the raw need burning there. He needed her to eat just as much as she needed the food. Slowly, she leaned forward and took the bite. The flavor exploded on her tongue, rich and savory. Drogo let out a low, satisfied rumble that vibrated through the seat, his eyes darkening as he watched her chew. He fed her piece after piece, ignoring his own hunger, until she was full and sleepy. As the plane began its descent, the pilot announced their arrival in the Iron Kingdom. Anna looked out the window. Below them, the world was white and jagged, a landscape of snow and ice. She wasn't just in a different place, she was on a different planet. Chapter 7. The Cold Palace. The moment the jet door opened, the cold hit Anna like a physical blow. It was a dry, biting freeze that instantly numbed her exposed skin and made her lungs ache with every inhale. The Iron Kingdom was not merely cold, it was hostile. Wind whipped across the tarmac, carrying snowflakes that felt like shards of glass. She shivered violently, shrinking back into the depths of Drogo's jacket, but before her foot could touch the frozen stairs, He was there. Drogo scooped her up into his arms effortlessly, shielding her body with his own massive bulk. He radiated heat like a furnace, a stark contrast to the frozen world he ruled. "Burrow deep, little one," he murmured against her hair, his voice competing with the howling wind. "The North does not forgive weakness." He carried her down the stairs toward a waiting convoy of black SUVs, but beyond the vehicles, a crowd had gathered. The pack. Hundreds of them stood in perfect military-style formation along the edge of the airfield. They were tall, broad-shouldered people wrapped in heavy furs and gray wool, their breath puffing in the air like smoke. They had come to see the king return, and more importantly, to see the mate he had claimed. Anna peeked out from the collar of the jacket, and she saw the confusion ripple through the ranks. They were expecting a warrior queen, a fierce she-wolf with bared teeth and a sword. Instead, they saw a trembling girl buried in a coat that was 5 sizes too big. She saw the looks exchanged between the warriors, the furrowed brows, the slight curls of lips. Disappointment. They didn't think she was worthy. She buried her face in Drogo's neck, shame burning hot in her chest. Drogo felt her retreat. He stopped walking in the middle of the tarmac, turning slowly to face his subjects. He didn't speak. He just let his alpha aura flare outward, a wave of dominance so potent it felt like gravity had doubled. The entire front row of warriors dropped to their knees, bowing their heads in submission. It was a silent, brutal reminder. Question my choice, and you question me. He turned and deposited her into the back seat of the lead vehicle, climbing in after her. The drive to the palace was short and silent. The palace itself was a fortress of black stone jutting out of the side of a mountain, imposing and terrifying. Inside, it was a maze of high ceilings, stone corridors, and flickering torches. Drogo didn't stop for pleasantries. He marched her past the bowing servants, up a grand staircase, and into the master wing. He pushed open double doors into a room that was larger than the entire house she grew up in. A massive fireplace roared with logs the size of tree trunks. "Stay here," Drogo commanded, setting her down near the fire. He looked torn, his hand lingering on her arm. "I have to deal with the council. They will want answers about the summit. Do not leave this room. The palace is a labyrinth, and not everyone is loyal." He kissed her forehead, a brief searing touch, and then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut, and the lock turned. Once again she was locked in. But this time, the cage was a palace, and the cold creeping in from the windows felt like it was trying to reach her very bones. Chapter 8. The Golden Cage. Morning light in the Iron Kingdom was gray and unforgiving, filtering through the heavy velvet curtains of the master's suite. Anna woke up alone in a bed that could comfortably sleep 5 people. The sheets were silk, smelling of sandalwood and Drogo, but the space beside her was cold. He hadn't come back last night. She sat up, the events of the last 24 hours crashing down on her. She was in a fortress at the edge of the world, mated to a king she barely knew, and hiding in a room because she was too afraid to face the people who looked at her with disdain. She climbed out of bed and approached the massive wardrobe built into the wall. She opened the doors and gasped. It was filled. Someone, presumably the terrified staff, had stocked it overnight. But as she ran her fingers along the fabrics, her heart sank. It was all silk, velvet, cashmere, and lace. Gowns fit for a coronation, lingerie fit for a seductress, and heavy fur coats fit for a queen. There were no jeans, no t-shirts, no simple cotton dresses. It was a costume closet for a doll, not clothes for a woman who was used to working for a living. Anna selected the simplest thing she could find, a long-sleeved gray wool dress that was still far too elegant for her taste, and dressed quickly. The room was beautiful, filled with books and art. But after 3 hours, the silence became maddening. Her stomach growled. She needed food, and she needed to move. She approached the double doors and tried the handle. Unlocked. She sighed with relief and pulled it open, only to be blocked by a wall of black fabric. 2 massive guards stood on either side of the door, their arms crossed. "I need to go to the kitchen," Anna said, trying to sound authoritative, though her voice wavered. "The king has ordered you to remain in the suite, Luna," one of the guards said, not unkindly but firmly. He didn't look her in the eye. "I'm hungry," she insisted. "I just want to get an apple. I can find the kitchen myself." "We can send for a tray," the guard replied, not moving an inch. Frustration bubbled up in her chest. She wasn't a porcelain figurine. She was used to moving, to working, to being free in her own invisible way. "I don't want a tray. I want to walk. I am not a prisoner here." She tried to push past them, but it was like pushing against a boulder. "Is there a problem?" The deep, resonant voice came from down the hallway. Drogo was striding toward them, flanked by his beta, Ronan. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, his shirt sleeves rolled up as if he had been brawling or burying bodies. The guard snapped to attention, stepping back instantly. Drogo looked from the guards to Anna's flushed, angry face. "They won't let me leave," Anna accused, pointing a finger at the guards. "You locked me in a tower like some damsel in distress. I'm bored, Drogo, and I'm hungry, and I hate these clothes." Ronan choked back a cough, clearly surprised that anyone would speak to the Iron Wolf with such tone. Drogo, however, didn't look angry. He looked at her defiant stance, at the fire in her eyes that had replaced the fear from yesterday. A slow, dark smirk spread across his face. He dismissed the guards with a flick of his wrist. "My apologies, little one," he said, stepping closer until he towered over her. "I forget that wild things do not like cages. Come. If you want the kitchen, I will take you to the kitchen. But be warned, the chef is terrifying." Chapter 9. Dinner with the Beast. The kitchen adventure had been a minor disaster, involving a terrified chef who nearly fainted when Anna tried to wash her own apple, but it was nothing compared to the ordeal of dinner. Drogo had insisted on a formal meal to welcome her properly. Now, seated at a dining table long enough to land a small aircraft on, Anna stared down at a plate of food she couldn't identify. It was something fancy, escargot, perhaps, or some rare northern delicacy that looked slimy and smelled distinctively like old socks. Candles flickered in the drafty hall. Servants stood in the shadows like statues, watching. Drogo sat at the head of the table, miles away, dressed in a fresh black suit. He was cutting his meat with precision, seemingly unbothered by the oppressive atmosphere. Anna poked at the slime on her plate with a silver fork that weighed more than her hand. She was starving, but her throat had closed up. This wasn't her life. She didn't belong here, surrounded by gold leaf and crystal. She belonged in the back room, washing the dishes, not creating them. "Is the food not to your liking?" Drogo's voice echoed down the table, startling her. He had stopped eating and was watching her with that intense, analytical gaze. "It's lovely," Anna lied, her voice small. "I'm just not very hungry." Drogo slammed his knife down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The servants flinched. "Do not lie to me, Anna. You are terrified of the fork. You hate the dress. And you are looking at the door as if you are calculating the sprint speed needed to escape." He stood up, grabbing his wine glass and walking down the length of the table until he pulled out the chair next to her and sat down, invading her space. "Talk to me. What do you want?" Anna looked at him, at the frustration etched in his brow. He was trying. In his own aggressive, over-the-top way, he was trying to please her. The realization gave her courage. She pushed the plate of slimy mystery meat away. "I want a cheeseburger," she blurted out. "A greasy one, with pickles and fries, and I want to eat it with my hands, and I want to take off these shoes because they are pinching my toes." Drogo stared at her for a long second, his face unreadable. Then he threw his head back and laughed. It was a deep, rusty sound, as if he hadn't used it in years. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less like a statue of war. He turned to the head steward, who was trembling in the corner. "You heard the Luna," Drogo barked, a grin still lingering on his lips. "Clear this garbage. Bring us burgers and fries. Lots of them." 20 minutes later, the formal dining room witnessed a historic event. The Iron Wolf and his mate sat side by side, eating greasy burgers off fine china. Anna had kicked her shoes under the table and was dipping fries into ketchup with reckless abandon. Drogo ate with the same savage grace he did everything else, but he seemed relaxed, the tension in his shoulders easing. He wiped a smudge of ketchup from her chin with his thumb, his touch lingering. "Better?" he asked softly. "Much better," she smiled, feeling the first true spark of connection between them. "Good," he murmured, his eyes dropping to her lips. "Because I need you strong. Tomorrow, I show you what it means to be part of this pack, and it will not be as gentle as a dinner date." The promise hung in the air, heavy and thrilling, a reminder that the peace was temporary, but the beast was always watching. Chapter 10. The Training Grounds. The sound of metal clashing against metal woke Anna before the sun had fully risen. She rolled over, finding the bed empty again, but this time she didn't feel abandoned. She felt curious. She slipped out of bed, grabbing a heavy silk robe to wrap around herself, and followed the sound to the large balcony that overlooked the rear courtyard of the palace. The cold morning air nipped at her face, but the sight below froze her in place. The courtyard was a pit of black sand, surrounded by high stone walls. Inside the ring, a dozen warriors were sparring, their movements a blur of violence and speed. But in the center of them all was Drogo. He was shirtless, his skin glistening with sweat despite the freezing temperature. His back was a canvas of scars, claw marks, burn scars, old wounds from battles long won. He was fighting 3 men at once, moving with a lethal fluidity that was terrifying to behold. He dodged a sword swing, grabbed the attacker by the throat, and tossed him into the sand like a rag doll, all while spinning to block a kick from another warrior. He was magnificent. Brutal, yes, but magnificent. Anna gripped the stone railing of the balcony, her breath hitching. She had always been taught that violence was bad, that alphas were bullies. But watching him, she realized that his violence was controlled. It was a shield. He fought so his pack didn't have to. He was the wall that kept the world out. A strange heat pooled in her belly, a primal reaction to seeing her mate in his element. She wasn't scared of him. She wanted him. As if sensing her gaze, Drogo stopped mid-punch. He froze, his chest heaving, and slowly turned his head toward the balcony. His eyes locked onto hers instantly, gold burning through the gray morning mist. He said something to the warriors, who immediately backed down and bowed. Drogo walked toward the wall below her balcony, grabbing a towel to wipe the sweat from his face, but he never broke eye contact. "Enjoying the show?" he called up, his voice rough. "Is that how you solve all your problems?" she called back, surprising herself with the banter. "By hitting them?" "Only the stubborn ones," he smirked. "Come down here." It wasn't a question. Anna hesitated, then ran back through the room, down the stairs, and out the heavy back doors. When she reached the edge of the training ring, the warriors had cleared out, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Drogo stood on the other side of the waist-high fence, radiating heat and power. He walked over to her, the smell of musk, sweat, and pine overwhelming her senses. He didn't open the gate. Instead, he leaned over the fence, trapping her between his arms on the railing. "You should not be out here without a coat," he scolded, though his eyes were devouring her exposed collarbone where the robe had slipped. "I was watching you," she admitted, breathless. "And what did you see?" he asked, leaning closer until his nose brushed hers. "I saw a beast," she whispered. "Good," Drogo growled, closing the distance to press a hard, demanding kiss to her lips, tasting of salt and fire. "Because the wolves are circling, Anna, and you need a beast to keep them away." He pulled back, his expression hardening as he looked over her shoulder toward the palace gates. A black sedan was pulling into the driveway, flying the flag of the Southern Pack. Lady Seraphina had arrived, and the training was over. The real fight was about to begin. Chapter 11. A Luna's Duty. The arrival of the Southern Pack delegation brought a suffocating tension to the Iron Palace. The air grew thick with political maneuvering and the cloying scent of perfume that masked hidden daggers. Lady Seraphina swept through the halls as if she already owned them, her entourage of assistants and guards creating a barrier that Anna felt she could never penetrate. While Drogo was locked away in the Great Hall with the Council of Elders, a group of ancient grumpy wolves who hated change, Anna found herself wandering the corridors, feeling useless. She was technically the Luna, but she had no duties, no authority, and no idea how to navigate the complex social hierarchy of the court. That was exactly when Seraphina found her, cornering Anna near the kitchens with a smile that didn't reach her cold, blue eyes. Seraphina feigned concern, her voice dripping with faux sweetness as she explained that the council meeting was going poorly. She told Anna that the elders were parched and furious, and that the servants were too terrified to enter the room. She suggested that Anna, with her experience in service, would be the perfect person to bring in refreshments and perhaps smooth things over. It was a trap, obvious and clumsy, designed to reduce Anna to a waitress in front of the kingdom's most powerful leaders. Seraphina wanted the elders to see the king's mate serving tea like a common maid, cementing her status as unworthy. But Anna didn't see it as an insult. She saw a problem she knew how to solve. She prepared the heavy silver tray with steady hands, brewing the tea exactly how the old wolves liked it, strong, dark, and piping hot. When Anna pushed open the heavy oak doors of the Great Hall, the shouting stopped instantly. The room was filled with smoke and testosterone, the elders standing around the massive table shouting at a stoic, visibly irritated Drogo. They all turned to stare at the small woman entering their battlefield. Seraphina, lurking near the entrance, smirked in anticipation of the humiliation. But Anna didn't cower. She didn't shake. She walked to the head of the table with a quiet, graceful dignity that she had perfected over years of being invisible. She didn't serve them like a servant. She served them like a hostess. She placed a cup before the loudest elder, a scarred wolf named Torin, and met his eyes with a calm smile. "Chamomile and raw honey, Elder Torin," she said softly, her voice carrying through the silent room, "to help with the throat after so much shouting." Torin blinked, stunned into silence. He took the cup, grunted, and sat down. The tension in the room popped like a balloon. One by one, the elders sat, accepting the tea, their aggression deflated by the simple domestic act of care in the middle of their war room. Drogo watched her from the head of the table, his expression shifting from irritation to a burning, intense pride. He saw what Seraphina had failed to predict. A pack is a family, and a Luna is the mother. Anna hadn't lowered herself. She had taken care of her family. As she turned to leave, Drogo caught her hand, pulling her to his side. He didn't let her go back to the kitchens. He sat her down in the empty chair beside him, the Luna's chair. "Stay," he commanded, his eyes challenging the room to object. "My mate has a better head for peace than any of us." Seraphina's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated hatred as the door closed in her face, leaving Anna firmly seated at the right hand of the king. Chapter 12. The first night. The victory in the council room felt momentous, but as night fell over the Iron Kingdom, a different kind of tension began to brew. The mating bond, that invisible tether connecting Anna to Drogo, was tightening with every passing hour. It was a physical ache, a constant hum in her blood that made it impossible to concentrate on anything but him. She lay in the massive bed in the master suite, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside the stone walls. The palace was quiet, but her senses were dialed up to 11. She could hear the heavy, rhythmic tread of boots down the hallway long before the door handle turned. She sat up, clutching the silk sheets to her chest as the door opened and King Drogo stepped inside. He looked wild. He had discarded his formal jacket and tie hours ago, his dress shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest, sleeves rolled up to reveal the thick muscles of his forearms. His hair was messy, as if he had been running his hands through it in frustration. He didn't say a word. He locked the door behind him, a sound that always sent a shiver down Anna's spine, and walked straight to the bed. He stopped at the edge, gripping the footboard with white-knuckled intensity, his golden eyes burning in the darkness. The scent of him, rain, musk, and raw power, filled the room, making Anna's head spin. He looked like a man on the edge of a cliff, fighting a battle between his human restraint and his wolf's primal need. "I cannot sleep," Drogo rasped, his voice rough with exhaustion. "My wolf. He will not settle. He knows you are here. He knows you are alone." Anna's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew what this meant. The bond demanded proximity. "What do you want to do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "I need to be near you," he confessed, the admission sounding like it was torn from his throat. "I will not touch you. I will not claim you until you are ready, until you ask for it. But I need to be close." He waited for her permission, a king asking for entry into his own bed. Anna nodded slowly, sliding over to make room for him. Drogo let out a breath that sounded like a groan of relief. He stripped off his shirt and pants, leaving him in his boxer briefs, and climbed into the bed. The mattress dipped under his immense weight. He didn't lie on his side of the bed. He moved until his chest was pressed against her back, wrapping a heavy arm around her waist and pulling her flush against him. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply, and the tension left his body instantly. For Anna, it was overwhelming. His heat seeped into her skin, chasing away the cold of the north. His heartbeat thudded against her spine, slow and steady. It wasn't sexual, yet it was the most intimate moment of her life. She was wrapped in the arms of the most dangerous creature on earth, and for the first time, she felt completely, utterly safe. "Mine," he mumbled against her skin, the word slurring as sleep finally overtook him. "Yours," she whispered back into the darkness, realizing with a start that she meant it. She fell asleep to the sound of his breathing, unaware that outside the door the shadows were moving, and the peace of this night would be short-lived. Chapter 13. Sabotage. The morning sun brought a rude awakening, not from the light, but from the sound of tearing fabric. Anna had woken up alone again. Drogo was an early riser, running the kingdom before dawn, and had gone to the wardrobe to dress for the day. What she found made her blood run cold. The beautiful silk gowns, the warm wool dresses, even the heavy fur coats Drogo had gifted her. Everything had been destroyed, slashed with knives, ripped at the seams, and in some cases, stained with something that smelled foul and acidic. It was a vicious, petty act of violence, a message carved into velvet and lace. "You do not belong here." Anna stood frozen, clutching the shredded remains of the gray dress she had worn yesterday. Panic flared in her chest. If Drogo saw this, he would tear the palace apart. He would interrogate everyone, punish the guards, and likely start a war with the southern delegation. But beneath the panic, a spark of anger ignited. She was tired of being the victim. She was tired of being the invisible servant girl who needed a big, strong alpha to fight her battles. This was an attack on her, in her home, and she wasn't going to let it slide. She examined the damage closer and noticed something caught in the zipper of one of the ruined coats. A small, distinct silver charm shaped like a serpent. She recognized it immediately. It belonged to the bracelet worn by Serafina's personal maid, a sour-faced woman named Marta who had sneered at Anna in the hallway. Anna didn't call the guards. She didn't weep. She pulled on a pair of oversized sweatpants and a hoodie she found in the back of the closet, likely Drogo's, and marched out of the room. She navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the palace with a singular purpose, heading straight for the guest wing where the southern delegation was housed. She found Marta in the linen closet, gossiping with another servant. The maid looked up, her eyes widening in mock surprise, but the smirk on her lips gave her away. "Can I help you, my lady?" Marta asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Did you get lost on the way to the scullery?" Anna stepped into the closet and kicked the door shut. The sound echoed like a thunderclap. She wasn't tall, and she wasn't a warrior, but in that moment, she channeled every ounce of the Iron Wolf's energy she had absorbed. She held up the silver serpent charm. "You dropped this," Anna said, her voice deadly calm, "while you were destroying my property." Marta paled, the smirk vanishing. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." Anna stepped closer, invading the woman's space. "You think because I was a servant, I am weak. But you forget. Servants see everything. I know exactly how to make your life miserable without ever raising my voice. I know which laundry soap causes rashes. I know which tea leaves cause stomach cramps. And I know exactly what King Drogo does to people who threaten his mate." She leaned in, her eyes hard. "This is your one warning. If you ever touch my things again, I won't tell the king. I will deal with you myself. And I promise you, I am much more creative than he is." She dropped the charm into the trembling woman's hand and walked out. Her hands were shaking as she leaned against the wall in the hallway, the adrenaline crashing. But she felt a fierce sense of pride. She hadn't needed Drogo. She was learning to bite back. Chapter 14. The Beta's Secret. The victory over the maid was fleeting. Later that afternoon, while Anna was trying to salvage what was left of her wardrobe, a knock came at the door. It wasn't Drogo. It was Ronan, the Beta. He looked more serious than usual, his brow furrowed with worry as he stepped into the room and checked the hallway before closing the door. Ronan was a good man, loyal to a fault, but he carried the weight of the kingdom's secrets, and today, that weight seemed to be crushing him. He declined Anna's offer of water and stood by the fireplace, wringing his hands. "Luna, I need to speak with you," Ronan began, his voice low. "And I need you to promise not to tell the king that we had this conversation. If he knew I was burdening you with this, he would have my hide." "What is it, Ronan?" Anna asked, sensing the gravity of the situation. "Is Drogo okay?" "The king is strong," Ronan said, but he hesitated. "But his position is complicated. The Iron Kingdom has always been ruled by strength. The pack respects power above all else. When Drogo brought you here, he broke centuries of tradition. A king usually mates with a high-ranking female from another powerful pack to secure alliances and strengthen the bloodline." He looked at her apologetically. "Your status, or lack thereof, is being used against him." Anna felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "Serafina," she guessed. "Serafina is just the face of it," Ronan sighed. "There is a faction within our own pack, the Ironwood Loyalists. They believe Drogo has gone soft. They are spreading rumors that your blood is too weak to produce an heir, that any child you have will be a runt, unable to lead. They are using this to gather support for a challenge." He paused, looking her dead in the eye. "They want to challenge Drogo for the crown, a duel to the death. And while Drogo is the strongest warrior I have ever known, if the entire council turns against him because of this distracted state, he could lose." The room spun. Anna sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. She had worried about being embarrassed, about not fitting in, but she hadn't realized the stakes were this high. Her presence wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a death sentence for Drogo. He was risking his life, his crown, and his legacy just by keeping her. "Does he know?" Anna asked, her voice trembling. "He knows," Ronan nodded. "But he doesn't care. He would burn the kingdom to the ground before he let you go. That is why I am telling you. You need to understand the danger he is in. He is blinded by the bond. He won't see the knife coming until it's buried in his back." Ronan left her with that terrifying thought, leaving Anna alone in the silence. She looked around the luxurious room that had become her cage. She loved Drogo. She realized that now. She loved him enough to want him to live. And if staying here meant he would die, then there was only one choice left to make. The realization broke her heart, but it steeled her resolve. She couldn't be the reason the Iron Wolf fell. Chapter 15. The escape attempt. The storm that hit that night was violent, a blizzard that turned the world outside into a swirling white void. It was the perfect cover. Drogo was occupied in the war room, dealing with the very insurrection Ronan had warned her about. He had kissed her goodbye hours ago, promising to return before midnight. Anna knew she wouldn't be there when he got back. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she packed a small duffel bag, not with the silken furs, but with the warm, sturdy clothes she had stolen from his closet. She wrote a letter, tear-stained and brief, explaining that she wasn't leaving because she didn't love him, but because she loved him too much to destroy him. She left it on his pillow, the white paper stark against the black silk sheets. Moving through the palace was terrifying. Every shadow looked like a guard. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a gunshot. She used the servant passages she had discovered during her kitchen adventures, avoiding the main corridors. She made it to the side exit near the stables, the wind howling so loud it masked the sound of the heavy door opening. The cold was instantaneous and brutal, biting through her layers, but she pushed forward, trudging through the knee-deep snow toward the perimeter gate. She had no plan, no money, and nowhere to go. But she just needed to get across the border, away from his territory, so the bond would weaken and he could focus on saving his crown. She reached the iron gates, her fingers numb as she fumbled with the keypad code she had seen Ronan punch in once. The light turned green. The gate clicked. She pushed it open, sobbing into the wind, and stepped out into the freedom of the frozen wasteland. Going somewhere? The voice didn't come from behind her. It came from the darkness ahead. Anna screamed, stumbling back as a massive shape detached itself from the shadows of the pine trees. It was Drogo. He wasn't wearing a coat. He stood in the blizzard in just his suit trousers and a white shirt that was soaked through with snow and sweat, clinging to his muscular frame. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a monster. His eyes were glowing so bright they illuminated the snow around him, and his face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated agony and rage. He had felt her intent to leave through the bond. He had hunted her down. "Drogo, please," she cried, backing away as he stalked toward her. "I'm doing this for you. You'll lose everything if I stay." "You think I care about a crown?" he roared, his voice louder than the storm. He closed the distance in a blur of motion, grabbing her arms and hauling her against his wet, freezing chest. He wasn't gentle. He shook her, his fingers digging into her coat. "You think I care about the throne? About the council? About any of it?" He looked down at her, rain and melted snow dripping from his hair onto her face. "You are my everything, Anna. If you leave, I don't have a kingdom. I have nothing." "But they'll kill you," she sobbed, hitting his chest. "I'm weak. I'm nothing." "You are my mate," he bellowed, the sound cracking with heartbreak. He scooped her up into his arms, crushing her against him as if he were trying to merge their bodies into one. "We go back, now. And if you ever try to run from me again, I will chain you to my bed until you understand that you belong to me." He turned and marched back toward the palace, carrying her through the storm, his body radiating a terrifying heat. He was furious, he was broken, and he was absolutely, terrifyingly possessive. The escape had failed, but it had woken something dark in the king, a desperation that would make him dangerous to anyone, even her. Chapter 16. The Truth Revealed. The storm outside raged against the stone walls of the palace, but the tempest inside the master bedroom was far more dangerous. Drogo had kicked the door shut behind them, sealing them in the warmth of the firelight, but he didn't let Anna go. He marched her to the center of the room and set her down on the velvet rug before the hearth, his movements jerky and filled with suppressed violence. He was soaked to the bone, his white shirt clinging to his chest like a second skin, revealing the rapid, furious beating of his heart. He didn't care about the cold or the wet. His entire focus was on the small, trembling woman who had tried to leave him. He paced back and forth in front of her, running his hands through his wet hair, looking like a caged tiger deciding whether to bite or pace. "Ronan told you," Drogo stated, his voice devoid of inflection. It wasn't a question. He stopped pacing and looked at her, his golden eyes burning with a mixture of betrayal and desperation. "He told you about the unrest, about the council, and you decided, in your infinite wisdom, that the best way to help me was to rip my soul out of my chest and walk into a blizzard?" He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "You think you are saving me, Anna? You think leaving me to rule this kingdom alone with a hollow chest and a broken bond is mercy? It is cruelty." Anna shivered, clutching the blanket he had thrown at her. "I am weak, Drogo. Look at me. I have no wolf. I have no army. I am just a servant. If the pack challenges you because of me, you will have to fight them all. I can't be the reason you lose your crown." She stood up, her legs shaking, trying to make him understand. "I love you enough to leave. I want you to be the king you were meant to be, not a babysitter for a broken Omega." Drogo crossed the distance between them in a single stride. He grabbed her face in his large, warm hands, forcing her to look up at him. "You are not broken," he growled, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones fiercely. "You are the only thing that is whole in this entire cursed palace. Do you know why they fear me, Anna? Not because I am strong. They fear me because I am empty. Without a mate, an alpha king becomes a tyrant. The wolf takes over. I was slipping, Anna. Every day the darkness got a little closer. I was becoming a monster." He leaned his forehead against hers, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. "You are not my weakness. You are my anchor. You are the only reason I want to survive this war. If you leave, I won't fight for the crown. I will burn this kingdom to ash and let the snow bury it." The confession hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Anna realized then that she had misunderstood the nature of strength. It wasn't about claws or teeth. It was about being the reason someone else kept breathing. She reached up, her fingers tangling in his wet shirt, pulling him closer. "I won't run again," she promised, the words tasting like a vow. "I'll stay, even if they hate me." Drogo let out a shuddering breath, wrapping his arms around her and lifting her off the floor, burying his face in her neck. He held her as if she were made of glass, terrified that if he let go, she would shatter. Chapter 17. The heat begins. 3 days after the storm, the atmosphere in the palace shifted again, but this time it wasn't due to politics. It started subtly for Anna, a persistent fever that made her skin feel too tight and her senses dial up to an excruciating level. The smell of the coffee in the morning was too strong. The sound of the servants whispering in the hall was too loud. She felt restless, pacing the length of the suite, unable to sit still. Her body felt heavy and achy, a deep, throbbing heat pooling in her lower belly that she couldn't explain. She thought she was coming down with the flu, a delayed reaction to her exposure in the blizzard, and she curled up on the window seat, pressing her hot forehead against the cold glass. When Drogo returned from the training grounds that afternoon, the change was instantaneous. He opened the door and froze on the threshold. His nostrils flared, his pupils blowing wide until his eyes were swallowed by blackness. The scent hit him like a physical blow, sweet, cloying, and undeniably distinctive. It was the scent of a mate in heat. Biology took over reason in a split second. A low, guttural growl started deep in his chest, a sound so primal it made the hair on Anna's arms stand up. She looked at him, confused by the intensity of his stare, her face flushed and her eyes glassy. "Drogo?" she whispered, her voice husky. "I think I'm sick." "You are not sick," he rumbled, slamming the door shut and locking it with a force that rattled the frame. He didn't move toward her immediately. He was fighting a visibly painful battle for control. His knuckles were white as he gripped the door handle. "You are in heat, Anna. The bond is demanding completion." He turned to the intercom system on the wall and punched the button for the guard station. "Ronan!" he barked, his voice straining. "Initiate Red Wing protocol. Clear the entire East Wing. No male personnel within 500 yards of the master suite. If anyone crosses the perimeter, I will kill them. Do you understand?" "Understood, Alpha," Ronan's voice crackled back, urgent and knowing. Drogo ripped the intercom unit off the wall and threw it into the corner, severing the connection. He couldn't have distractions. The scent was driving him insane, stripping away the layers of civilization he wore like a costume. He turned to Anna, his movements predatory and fluid. "I have to lock us in," he told her, his voice rough. "Because right now, every unmated male in this pack can smell you. And if they come near this door, I will tear them apart." He walked toward her, tearing off his tie and throwing it aside. "And I don't want to share." Anna felt a wave of desire crash over her, responding to his dominance. The fear was gone, replaced by a biological imperative that was as old as time. She stood up, her legs trembling, and walked toward him. "Then don't share," she challenged softly. The restraint in Drogo snapped. He reached her in a blur, sweeping her up into his arms and carrying her toward the bed, the growls rumbling in his chest, vibrating through her own body. The outside world ceased to exist. There was only the heat, the scent, and the Alpha, who was finally going to claim what belonged to him. Chapter 18. The Poison. The room was a haze of candlelight and heavy, intoxicated breathing. Hours, or perhaps days, had passed. Anna had lost track of time. They were cocooned in the massive bed, tangled in silk sheets, existing in a bubble of intimacy that felt sacred. The mating heat had crested, leaving them exhausted but euphoric. Drogo lay beside her, propped up on one elbow, tracing the line of her jaw with a reverence that made her heart ache. He looked younger. The weight of the crown lifted from his brow. Tonight was the night. The heat had prepared her body, and the bond was screaming for the final step. The marking. "I have something for you," Drogo murmured, leaning over to the bedside table. He retrieved a crystal decanter and 2 heavy goblets. It is tradition in the Iron Kingdom. Before the Alpha bites his Luna, they share a cup of wine from the hidden cellar, a vintage older than the palace itself. It symbolizes the mixing of bloodlines. He poured the deep red liquid, the aroma of dark berries and oak filling the air. He handed her a goblet, his eyes shining with emotion. "To us, Anna? To the future." "To us?" she smiled, clinking her glass against his. She took a long sip. The wine was rich and velvety, warming her chest as it went down. She set the glass on the nightstand and leaned back into the pillows, pulling Drogo down for a kiss. His lips were warm, his taste addictive. He moved to hover over her, his mouth trailing down her neck to the sensitive spot where her shoulder met her neck, the marking spot. Anna arched into him, baring her neck, ready to accept him fully. But as his teeth grazed her skin, a sharp, tearing pain exploded in her stomach. It wasn't the heat. It was a cold, jagged agony that radiated outward from her gut, seizing her muscles. Anna gasped, her body arching violently off the mattress, not in pleasure, but in a spasm of pure shock. "Drogo," she choked out, her hands clutching at his shoulders. "Hurts. It hurts." Drogo pulled back instantly, confusion flashing across his face. "Anna?" Another spasm hit her, stronger this time. She coughed, and a speck of blood landed on the pristine white pillowcase. The color drained from Drogo's face. He scrambled off the bed, grabbing her face in his hands. Her skin was turning a terrifying shade of gray, and her eyes were rolling back in her head. "Anna, look at me!" he roared, panic shredding his voice. He smelled it then. Beneath the scent of sex and wine, there was a sharp, acrid odor rising from her pores. Wolfsbane. Concentrated, lethal wolfsbane. "No," he whispered, the realization hitting him like a sledgehammer. "No, no, no!" He grabbed her trembling body, pulling her against his chest as she began to convulse. "Help!" he bellowed, a roar so loud it cracked the window panes. "Healers! Get the healers in here! Now!" Anna's vision blurred. The last thing she saw was the face of the invincible Iron Wolf twisted in absolute terror, tears streaming down his face as he desperately tried to use his own energy to keep her heart beating. The darkness rushed in from the edges, cold and final, swallowing the room, the king, and the future they were supposed to have. Chapter 19. The Traitor Revealed. The master suite had been transformed from a sanctuary of love into a trauma center. Healers in white robes swarmed around the bed, shouting orders, injecting fluids, and casting magical wards to stabilize the Luna's failing heart. Drogo stood in the corner, exiled from his own bed by the head healer who had dared to shove the king aside to save the girl. Drogo was vibrating with a murderous energy. He was shirtless, his chest heaving, his eyes glowing a solid, demonic gold. He wasn't grieving yet. He was hunting. He held the crystal goblet in his hand, the glass cracking under the pressure of his grip. He brought it to his nose again. The scent was faint, masked by the wine, but to an alpha's heightened senses, it was unmistakable. Liquid nightshade mixed with wolfsbane, Drogo growled to Ronan, who stood by the door, pale and terrified. It wasn't in the bottle, it was in the glass. Someone dusted the inside of the glass before it was brought up. Drogo didn't wait for a response. He stormed out of the room, leaving the healers to fight for Anna's life. He needed to kill something. He marched down the corridor, Ronan and a squad of elite guards struggling to keep up with his long, furious strides. He kicked open the doors to the kitchen, the wood splintering. The staff screamed and scattered, cowering under the tables. Drogo grabbed the head steward by the collar, lifting him off his feet. "Who prepared the tray?" Drogo snarled, spit flying from his lips. "Who touched the glasses?" I don't know, Your Majesty," the steward stammered, weeping. It was Marta, the guest maid. She said she wanted to help. She said it was a peace offering from her mistress." Drogo dropped the man and turned, his sights set on the guest wing. Marta, Serafina's maid, the same woman Anna had confronted days ago. It all clicked into place. Serafina hadn't just wanted to humiliate Anna, she wanted to erase her. The realization turned his blood to ice. He moved through the palace like a wraith, silently and swiftly. When he reached the doors of the southern delegation suite, the guard stationed there tried to step forward. Drogo didn't even slow down. He backhanded the first guard with enough force to send him flying through the drywall and snapped the arm of the second. He kicked the double doors open. Lady Serafina was sitting by the fire, sipping tea, looking the picture of innocence. She looked up, feigning surprise, but the flash of fear in her eyes betrayed her. She knew. "Cassius," she started, standing up. "I heard there was a commotion." Drogo didn't speak. He crossed the room and grabbed her by the throat, slamming her against the stone mantelpiece. Her teacup shattered on the floor. You poisoned her, he whispered, his voice deadly calm, which was far more terrifying than his roar. You thought you could kill my mate and take her place? You thought I wouldn't smell your stench on her dying breath? Serafina clawed at his hand, gasping for air, her feet dangling off the floor. She is weak, she choked out. She is ruining you. She is my life. Drogo tightened his grip, listening to the strain of her windpipe. And you are going to pray to every deity you know that she wakes up. Because if she dies, Serafina, I will not kill you quickly. I will spend the next 50 years peeling the skin from your bones. He threw her to the floor, where she curled up, coughing and sobbing. Guard her, he commanded the men entering the room. If she moves, break her legs. No one leaves this room until the Luna opens her eyes. Chapter 20. The Awakening. Anna was floating in a dark, viscous ocean. It was cold, silent, and peaceful. The pain was gone, left behind on the shore of the living world. She felt heavy, sinking deeper and deeper into the abyss. It would be so easy to just let go, to sleep forever. But then, a sound pierced the darkness. A howl. It wasn't Drogo's roar. It was higher, sharper, a sound of pure defiance. Wake up! The voice echoed inside her head, commanding and ancient. Anna mentally looked around the void. Who is there? We are. A shape materialized out of the shadows. A massive white wolf with silver eyes. It was beautiful and terrifying, glowing with an inner light that pushed back the darkness. Anna realized with a jolt that this was her wolf. The spirit she thought she never had, the part of her that had been dormant because of her suppressed lineage and lack of confidence. The poison hadn't killed her wolf. It had woken it up to fight the toxicity. They tried to kill us, the wolf growled, nudging Anna's spirit form with its wet nose. But we are of the iron bloodline. We do not die in bed. The wolf bit down on Anna's spectral hand. The pain was sharp and electric. The darkness shattered like glass. Anna gasped, her eyes snapping open in the physical world. Her body arched off the mattress, a scream tearing from her throat as the nerves reconnected. The room was dim, smelling of sickness and antiseptic. A heavy weight was resting on her legs. She blinked, her vision clearing, and saw Drogo. He was kneeling by the bed, his head resting on her stomach, his hand gripping hers so tight her fingers were numb. He looked wrecked, his eyes red-rimmed, his face covered in stubble, looking like he hadn't slept or eaten in days. Drogo, she rasped, her throat feeling like it was full of sand. His head snapped up. For a second, he looked like he was seeing a ghost. Then, a sob broke from his chest, shattering his stoic mask completely. Anna, he breathed, scrambling up to cup her face. You came back. You came back to me. I saw her, Anna whispered, her voice stronger than it should have been. She felt different. The weakness that had plagued her all her life was gone, replaced by a humming, vibrant energy that coursed through her veins. She looked at Drogo, and he gasped. He wasn't looking at her brown eyes. He was staring into irises that had turned a glowing, molten silver. Your eyes, Drogo whispered, awe replacing the fear in his expression. They are silver, the mark of a spirit wolf. Anna sat up, the monitors beeping frantically as her heart rate stabilized into a powerful rhythm. She wasn't just an Omega anymore. She was something else, something ancient. Where is she? Anna asked, her voice cold and hard. Where is the woman who tried to kill me? Drogo's expression darkened, the relief shifting back to the promise of violence. She is waiting for judgment. Good. Anna swung her legs over the side of the bed, pushing away the healer who tried to stop her. She stood up, swaying slightly, but Drogo caught her. She looked up at him, the silver in her eyes swirling. Take me to her. I want her to see that she missed. Chapter 21. The Execution. The great hall of the Iron Palace was silent, a vast cavern of stone filled with the entire pack hierarchy. Hundreds of wolves stood shoulder to shoulder, their breath held, their eyes fixed on the center of the room. In the middle of the floor, Lady Seraphina was on her knees. Her expensive red dress was torn, her hair matted, and her hands were bound with silver chains that burned her skin. She looked small, pathetic, and terrified, a stark contrast to the arrogant woman who had sneered on the tarmac. King Drogo stood beside her, a dark sentinel of judgment, his hand resting on the hilt of a heavy broadsword. He looked toward the double doors at the far end of the hall, waiting. The doors groaned open. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Anna walked in. She was pale, leaning slightly on Ronan for support, but her head was high. She wasn't wearing a gown. She was wearing Drogo's black shirt, which hung to her knees, and simple leggings. It was a statement. She was stripped of pretense, raw and real. But it was her eyes that silenced the room. They weren't brown anymore. They swirled with a luminous metallic silver, the mark of a spirit wolf, a rarity not seen in the North for centuries. The whispers died instantly. The pack didn't see a weak Omega servant. They saw a miracle. Anna walked slowly to the center of the room, stopping a few feet from Seraphina. The kneeling woman looked up, expecting to see a corpse, and recoiled at the sight of the glowing silver eyes. "You!" Seraphina whispered, her voice cracking. "What are you?" "I am the mistake you made," Anna replied, her voice steady and echoing in the silence. Drogo drew the broadsword. The sound of steel ringing against the scabbard was sharp and final. He held the hilt out to Anna. "She is yours to judge," he said, his voice hard. "The punishment for treason and attempted regicide is death. Take her head, and the pack will know your strength." Anna looked at the heavy sword, then at the trembling woman. She saw the fear in Seraphina's eyes, the same fear Anna had lived with her entire life as a servant. Killing her would be easy. It would satisfy the anger burning in her chest. But Anna realized that killing Seraphina would only prove that she was just as brutal as the world that made her. She didn't want to rule with fear. She wanted to rule with authority. She pushed the sword away. "No," Anna said. The pack murmured. Drogo frowned, confused. "She tried to kill you, Anna. She deserves to die." "Death is too easy," Anna said, stepping closer to Seraphina until she was looking down at her. "If I kill her, her pain ends in a second, and she becomes a martyr for the South." Anna leaned down, her silver eyes boring into Seraphina's soul. "I want her to live. Strip her of her titles, strip her of her rank, break the treaty with her father, and banish her to the Rogue Lands." Seraphina screamed. "No! Kill me! Please, just kill me!" To a highborn wolf, becoming a rogue, homeless, packless, hunted, was a fate infinitely worse than death. It was a slow, degrading end. "You wanted to treat me like trash," Anna whispered. "Now you will see what it feels like to be nothing." She straightened up and looked at Drogo. "Get her out of my sight." Drogo looked at his mate with a mixture of shock and awe. He sheathed the sword with a snap. He nodded to the guards, who dragged the screaming Seraphina away. The king turned to the pack, raised his hand, and roared. It was a sound of victory, of acceptance. The pack roared back, a deafening sound that shook the dust from the rafters. They weren't cheering for the execution. They were cheering for their queen. Chapter 22. The Marking. The adrenaline of the judgment faded as soon as the heavy doors of the master suite clicked shut, leaving Anna and Drogo alone in the quiet. Anna swayed, her newfound strength flickering as the physical toll of the poison and the resurrection caught up with her. Drogo was there instantly, scooping her up into his arms before her knees could hit the floor. He carried her not to the bed, but to the large armchair by the fire, settling himself down and pulling her into his lap. He held her tightly, burying his face in her hair, breathing in her scent as if he were drowning and she was oxygen. You terrified me, he murmured against her neck, his voice thick with emotion. When I saw you on that bed, when I couldn't feel your bond, I thought the world had ended. I'm here, Anna whispered, resting her head on his shoulder, listening to the frantic beat of his heart. My wolf woke up. She wouldn't let me go. She is strong, Drogo agreed, pulling back to look into her silver eyes. Stronger than I ever gave you credit for. I offered you a sword, and you chose a fate far crueler than steel. You are dangerous, my love. He traced the line of her jaw with his thumb. But we are not finished. The bond, it is frayed. The poison damaged the connection. We need to seal it. Permanently. Anna knew what he meant. The marking. The final step that would bind their souls and bodies together, allowing them to share strength, thoughts, and pain. Before the poisoning, she had been nervous. Now, after staring death in the face, she wanted nothing more than to be tethered to him forever. She shifted in his lap, straddling his waist, her hands moving to unbutton his shirt. Then do it, she commanded softly. Claim me, Drogo. Make sure I can never leave you again. Drogo groaned, a low rumbling sound that vibrated through her chest. He tilted her head back, exposing the delicate curve of her neck where her scent was strongest. His canines elongated, sharp and white in the firelight. He didn't rush. He kissed the spot first, a tender, reverence touch that sent shivers down her spine. Then, with a sudden surge of possessive heat, he bit down. The pain was sharp and white-hot, but it was immediately followed by a rush of euphoria that flooded her entire system. It felt like a dam breaking. Drogo's emotions crashed into her mind. His overwhelming love, his possessive need, his relief. She gasped, clutching his shoulders as their souls knitted together, fusing into a single entity. The silver in her eyes flared brighter, mixing with the gold of his in a psychic dance. He licked the mark, sealing the wound, and pulled back to look at her. Mine, he growled, the word echoing not just in the room, but inside her head. Yours, she replied, feeling the truth of it settle deep in her bones. She wasn't just Anna the servant anymore. She was Anna, the Iron Queen, mate to the most powerful alpha in the world. And as Drogo kissed her, deep and claiming, she knew that the invisible girl was gone forever. Chapter 23. The Coronation Ball. 1 month later, the Iron Palace was transformed. The dark, imposing fortress was draped in banners of black and gold. The air smelled of roasting meats, expensive wine, and fresh pine. It was the night of the Coronation Ball, the official presentation of the new Luna to the Allied Pax. But this time, Anna wasn't hiding in the shadows with a tray of drinks. She stood in front of a full-length mirror in the master suite, staring at a stranger. The woman in the reflection was regal. Her hair, once usually tied back in a messy bun, fell in cascading waves around her shoulders. She wore a gown of liquid gold silk that hugged her curves and flared at the feet, a stark contrast to the black military dress uniform Drogo would be wearing. The dress was backless, proudly displaying the fresh, crescent-shaped scar on her neck, the Alpha's mark. It wasn't a scar of shame. It was a crown jewel. Her eyes, still holding that faint silver shimmer, looked back at her with a calm confidence she had earned through fire. You look... Drogo's voice trailed off as he entered the room. He stopped dead in his tracks, his hands adjusting his cufflinks. He was breathtaking in his formal alpha regalia, medals shining on his chest, but he only had eyes for her. He walked over, standing behind her, his dark eyes meeting hers in the mirror. You look like a goddess. I look like a queen, she corrected him with a smile, leaning back against his chest. Better, he agreed, kissing the top of her head. Are you ready? They are all waiting. The Northern Alphas, the Southern delegation. Everyone wants to see the woman who brought the Iron Wolf to his knees. I didn't bring you to your knees, she teased, turning in his arms to fix his tie. I just gave you a reason to stand up. Drogo chuckled, the sound rich and warm. He offered her his arm. Come, let us show them. They walked out of the suite and down the grand staircase. As they appeared at the top of the stairs, the music in the ballroom below stopped. Thousands of faces turned upward. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then, as one, the entire room bowed. It wasn't a polite bow, it was a deep, reverent submission. Anna gripped Drogo's arm, her heart fluttering, but she didn't look down. She scanned the crowd, spotting Ronan smiling in the front row, seeing the terrified respect in the eyes of the visiting dignitaries. They descended the stairs, not as a king and his servant, but as equals. They moved to the center of the dance floor. The music started. A slow, haunting waltz. Drogo pulled her close, his hand firm on her waist. As they spun, the world blurred around them. Anna remembered the first time she saw him, sleeping on that couch, and how terrified she had been. Now she held the monster in her arms, and he was the only safe place in the world. They are all looking at you, Drogo whispered in her ear. Let them look, Anna whispered back, echoing his words from so long ago. I'm not invisible anymore. Chapter 24. Epilogue. The Whisper. The nursery was the warmest room in the palace, painted in soft creams and filled with the scent of baby powder and lavender. Outside, the winter snow was falling gently, blanketing the Iron Kingdom in silence. But inside, there was life. 1 year had passed since the coronation, and the kingdom had flourished under the dual rule of the Iron Wolf and his Silver Queen. The rebellions had ceased, the borders were secure, and the pack was stronger than ever. Anna walked quietly into the room, her bare feet making no sound on the thick rug. She smiled at the sight before her. In the large rocking chair by the window, King Drogo was asleep. The massive, lethal alpha who made nations tremble was slumped comfortably in the chair, his mouth slightly open, looking completely exhausted. And curled up on his broad chest, rising and falling with his deep breaths, was a tiny bundle wrapped in a black blanket. Their son, Prince Kale. He was only 3 weeks old, but he already had his father's dark hair and, terrifyingly, his mother's stubbornness. Drogo had insisted on taking the night shift, claiming that an alpha needed little sleep, but clearly the baby had won this round. One of Drogo's large hands was resting protectively over the infant's back, dwarfing the child, while the other hung loosely over the armrest. It was a tableau of absolute peace, a stark contrast to the violence that had brought them together. Anna moved closer, her heart swelling with a love so big it hurt. She reached out and gently brushed a lock of hair from Drogo's forehead. He didn't wake, but he stirred, his arm tightening instinctively around the baby. He mumbled something unintelligible in his sleep, his brow furrowing as if he were fighting a dream battle. Anna leaned down, her lips brushing against his ear. The memory of that first night in the VIP lounge washed over her. The fear, the recklessness, and the single sentence that had changed the course of history. She smiled, realizing that everything had come full circle. You're still the most handsome devil, she whispered, her voice barely a breath, soft and trembling just like it had been that night. Drogo's eyes didn't snap open this time. Instead, a slow, lazy smile spread across his face, his eyes cracking open just a sliver to reveal a glint of molten gold. He didn't lock a door. He didn't roar. He simply shifted the baby closer to his heart, looked at his wife with a love that could burn down the world, and whispered the only word that mattered. Mine.